Well, thank you very much, Mary.
Right, Nina Hussain at Buckingham Palace for the time being. Thank you. So let's get a reminder of the statements that we've had in the past hour. First, this from the royal household. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. And that was a statement from Buckingham Palace this afternoon. And that was followed by one from the new King, King Charles III, as we know he will now be. The death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world. During this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and the deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held. And Chris, that was the statement from her son, the new King, Charles III.
Yes, we heard the Prime Minister refer to the King as that. We've since sought some clarification from the King's office, and they have also confirmed that he will reign as King Charles III. People might ask, why are we talking about that? Well, of course, the Queen's father wasn't called George. He reigned as King George VI, but he was his actual name was Bertie. So it was not ever certain until we had confirmation that the former Prince of Wales would rule as King Charles III, and that has now been confirmed by the King's office.
We've had some more statements. This from the former Prime Minister John Major. For 70 years, Her Majesty the Queen devoted her life to the service of our nation and its well-being. And he talks of this moment of deep sadness. And Tony Blair wrote, "We have not just lost our monarch, but the matriarch of our nation, the figure who more than any other brought our country together, kept us in touch with our better nature, personified everything which makes us proud to be British." And the Leader of the Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, wrote, "For all of us, the Queen has been a constant presence in our lives, as familiar as a member of the family, and yet one who has exercised a calm and steadying influence over our country. Most of us have never known a time when she was not there. Her death is not only a tragedy for the royal family, but a terrible loss for us all." And I think that is a sentiment that will chime with so many people this evening, both here and across the world. A sense of profound, in a way, personal loss, which is, in some ways, seems ridiculous. We didn't know her, did we? We only knew what we saw, but we feel something very profound.
Yes, and I think probably the last time people might remember feeling like this for someone they didn't know might have been the sudden death of Princess Diana, when people were expressing emotions for someone they had never personally known. A different set of circumstances, of course, for this Queen who reached the amazing age of 96, but who has been through, herself a very personally difficult period, having lost the man upon whom she relied so much. Since April of last year, she has reigned as a widow queen, and I don't think we should underestimate quite how difficult she found that adjustment.
Reads,
not having,
I will find that
Prince
statement
Philip,
for you.
by her side. So
the Queen
yes,
died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. So let's take a moment to reflect on that news. So let me just now repeat that statement from the royal household, which we have received in the last few minutes. It reads, "The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow." And so the reign of Elizabeth II comes to a close after 70 years at the age of 96. Her son Charles is now king. For most of us, she has been the only monarch we have ever known. Her reign has been the longest and, in the view of many, one of the most successful in British history. Since her coronation in 1953, the young woman who became our Queen at just 25 years of age set the standard by which future monarchs will be judged. She protected and she preserved the institution of the monarchy in turbulent times while shaping it for the future. A life devoted to public service that has endeared her to people both here, across the wider Commonwealth and indeed the world. And we will continue our live programming to reflect on the Queen's remarkable 70-year reign as we enter a new era under the new King. And our royal editor, Chris Shipp, joins me now. First reaction, Chris.
Mary, we have been talking this afternoon about the significant statement from Buckingham Palace at lunchtime today.
These images, I have to say, there are lots of very heartfelt and eloquent tributes being paid here in the UK and around the world. The former Prime Minister, Sir John Major, calling the Queen selfless and wise, with a wonderful generosity of spirit. He said he was greatly saddened, the news of her death. The former Prime Minister, Tony Blair, we've lost not just our monarch, but the matriarch of our nation, the figure who, more than any other, brought our country together and kept us in touch with our better nature and personified everything which makes us proud to be British. And Mr. Blair goes on, she was not only the respected and loved monarch, she was respected because of the qualities of duty and decency and integrity and fidelity which she embodied, and loved because of the love and affection that she bestowed on us. And we will mourn her and we will miss her. That was Tony Blair speaking earlier on. Lots of other tributes from around the world. President Macron, the French president, Her Majesty the Queen embodied the British nation's continuity and unity for over 70 years. And President Macron says, I remember her as a friend of France, a kind-hearted Queen who's left a lasting impression on her country and her century. And then President Zelensky of Ukraine, that troubled country, sending this message. On behalf of the Ukrainian people, we extend sincere condolences to the royal family, the entire UK and the Commonwealth over this irreparable loss. Our thoughts and prayers are with you. And then we have the German president too, Herr Steinmeier, saying Queen Elizabeth was a woman who shaped a century. And Her Majesty enjoyed the highest respect in the whole world. A very concise statement, but one that conveys the fundamental truth about the life and the times. Let's think about the United States. There are statements from President Trump, former President Obama, but I've just received this from President Biden, And this has just come in from the White House. So as we look at these images of the Queen's long life from her coronation back in 1953 all the way to this year in 2022, President Biden says, in a world of constant change, she was a steadying presence and a source of comfort and pride for generations of Britons, including many who've never known their country without her. That is such a powerful theme today, as Nick and I have been discussing. An enduring admiration for Queen Elizabeth II united people across the Commonwealth, and the 7 decades of her history-making reign bore witness to an age of unprecedented human advancement and the forward march of human dignity. She was the first British monarch, says President Biden, to whom people all around the world could feel a personal and immediate connection. And we see the crowds gathering at Buckingham Palace, and they too, with their mobile devices, will be aware of lots of these tributes being paid as they gather there. And now that the formal announcement has been fixed to the main railings in front of the palace, as it is done at times of great events like this, happy events and sad events. She was the first British monarch, says President Biden, to whom people all round the world could feel a personal and immediate connection. Supported by her beloved Prince Philip, the Queen led always with grace, an unwavering commitment to duty, and the incomparable power of her example. And President Biden goes on to say she endured the dangers and the deprivations of a world war alongside the British people and rallied them during the devastation of a global pandemic to look to better days ahead. Queen Elizabeth II, this is how he concludes, was a stateswoman of unmatched dignity and constancy, who deepened the bedrock alliance between the United Kingdom and the United States. She helped make our relationship special. And as a concluding thought, he says this: in the years ahead, we in the United States look forward to continuing a close friendship with the King and the Queen Consort. Today, the thoughts and prayers of people all across the United States are with the people of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth in their grief. We send our deepest condolences to the royal family, who were not only mourning their Queen, but their dear mother, grandmother and great-grandmother. And her legacy will loom large in the pages of British history and in the story of the world. I have to say, they're very moving tributes. I haven't been able to come across a few of them yet, because I know they're just waiting there for me from the Obamas and President Trump and other leaders. But they are moving, they are eloquent. And Nick, they really do stop you in your tracks. And they just underline the fact that, you know, the appreciation for what the Queen achieved and what she represented is truly global. It's not, you know, we tend to talk about the Commonwealth. Of course, that's important. It's beyond that.
As Boris Johnson said, it's only when you lose somebody that you really appreciate just who they were and how much you valued them. And the same words are in so many of these tributes: grace and duty and dignity and constancy. She was someone who personified simple qualities like decency and tolerance, who encouraged politicians to be the best that they could be, who encouraged all of us really to be the best of ourselves, because she did embody those old-fashioned concepts. And she did that for decade after decade. And she was that most important thing for a monarch. She was someone who unified people. She brought people together. And the challenge for Charles now will be to continue to seek to do the same, particularly at this moment when there are pressures within the United Kingdom against unity. And so Charles, I think, will be very much aware of the challenges that he faces and the task that he must now begin.
Well, Charles's younger son, Harry, is, we understand, arriving at Balmoral just about now. I think we're expecting the arrival in a few minutes. Here we are, the entrance to the Balmoral estate, but the Duke of Sussex, who's travelling alone, we believe, because his wife, Meghan, is not accompanying him, but he's arriving. He's arriving. He didn't come with the main royal party earlier, with the Duke of Cambridge, his brother, and with Prince Andrew and with Prince Edward and the Countess of Wessex. He wasn't with that group. They flew up to Aberdeen quite a few hours ago, and they've been in Balmoral since then. They joined the Princess Royal and the Prince of Wales, who were already there at the Queen's side. So Prince Harry's arrival is considerably later than that. And indeed, it's quite a while after the official announcement of the Queen's death at the age of 96. But we understand that the Duke of Sussex, Harry, is on his way there, and he's about to arrive at Balmoral at this time, where he will join the other members of the royal family. And as we've already heard, the King, King Charles III, and the Queen Consort, they will be staying at Balmoral tonight. They're not returning to London tonight. We had that statement earlier from the King. And they will be returning to London tomorrow. We've also heard from the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who paid her tribute to the Queen and thanked her for a lifetime of service, and reflected indeed the great sense of national sadness at the news that came today, because although the Queen was 96 and had health problems,
Prince William, upon the death of his grandmother, who was the Duke of Cambridge, is now officially the Duke of Cornwall and Cambridge, because he has, as we anticipated, he has inherited the Dukedom of Cornwall, which is the dukedom which is given to the heir to the throne, which Prince William now is. Prince William is the heir to the throne. The monarch is King Charles III, and it's just worth repeating that.
Yes, it
Prince
does.
William,
It is
upon the death of
because
his
it is quite
grandmother.
difficult to grasp, really.
Yes.
So,
So you've had confirmation from the King's office that he will reign as King Charles III, and confirmation from William and Kate's office, or Catherine as she is officially known, that they will be called the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall and Cambridge. He is not yet the Prince of Wales, because that is a title that needs to be bestowed on him by his father, the King.
all right, all of which will happen in due course,
Yes.
as is the way with these things. There's a very strict set of
There
rules,
is,
and they will be
well,
followed.
I think I would point out that things are a little bit different to when, when the Queen became monarch in 1952. Prince Charles was only 4 years old. I mean, it is a very different set of circumstances we've got now. So he wasn't officially bestowed with the title of Prince of Wales until 1969. I expect that a lot of these things, for example, the coronation of the new king, Prince William being bestowed the title of Prince of Wales, I expect that will happen a little bit more quickly, just because of the age of the individuals involved and the very different set of circumstances we've got than the one we had in 1952.
Yes, interesting stuff, Chris. Thank you. Well, let's go straight over to Windsor Castle now, and Emily Morgan is there for us. Emily, what's happening?
Well, I mean, as you can expect, a very sombre mood here this evening. I think the news this evening is the news that the residents here in Windsor were most fearing. At around 6:30, just before 6:30, that's just over an hour ago, the flag that had been flying all afternoon here over Windsor Castle was lowered. At that point, silence descended over this hill in front of the castle. The whole town, it appeared, fell silent. That flag then went back up to half-mast, and almost simultaneously a rainbow appeared next to the flag. It was a moment as symbolic as it was poignant, I think. Now, as you can see behind me, flowers have begun to be laid outside the castle. Until just a few moments ago, there were huge crowds here. Residents and tourists from Windsor had come out. They've been laying flowers. Now, those crowds have been slightly pushed down the hill. There are still an awful lot of people coming. They've been taking photos, standing still, hugging each other, many of them spontaneously crying. It has really been scenes of huge emotion, and I think the people here of Windsor are feeling this most poignantly, mainly because the Queen had been living here for the last 2.5 years. It really was her home during the pandemic. It is somewhere that the residents feel the Queen was her neighbour, that she was part of the community. It is also where she loved to live. It is where she felt most comfortable. And an awful lot of people here in Windsor, some of the people we've even been speaking to this afternoon, feel that they knew her, feel that they knew her personally. Many of them had seen her in the Great Park walking her dogs, or indeed until recently riding her horses. Now, of course, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have also made Windsor their home. We saw, but the Duchess of Cambridge is still here, and of course that must have been a real comfort to the Queen, knowing that the Duke and Duchess were here with her. But this evening, as you can probably hear, across the town.
So, Emily, the atmosphere, from what you say, is very sombre in Windsor, yes?
Yes, absolutely. I don't know if you can hear it, but just all afternoon it has been busy. Visitors have been continuing to come in and out of the mood has completely. They're taking photos. A lot of them are crying. It really struck me. Families have been coming out. Some of them laying flowers. Whole families, mothers, and pay their respects. And just to take a moment, I suppose, to the fact that the Queen, after 70 years on the throne, has passed away.
Chris, that was very notable, what Emily was saying, and we're joined also by historian Anna Whitelock. Thank you, Anna, for coming to us today. There's an it is an extraordinary effect the Queen has had on her people.
Yeah, it's a gulp moment. It's a moment where everybody's like, oh. I was just talking to someone who was watching at home, and they just had a Deliveroo dropped off, opened the door, and the Deliveroo driver just went, Queen's dead. And it was just this kind of moment of, it's just cut through. Nobody normally talks to their delivery drivers, but there was just this moment of announcing it. And I think, yeah, as we kind of reflect, and just small things like we've now got a king. This morning we were in the reign of Queen Elizabeth. Perhaps some of us put a stamp on a letter today. Soon our stamps will change. Soon our coins will change. People who are Queen's Counsel will be King's Counsel. Just all these small things, you start to reflect on the layers and layers of culture and just way of being that the Queen has permeated over 7 decades. It's remarkable. And I think, I was struck by just reflecting back on that Jubilee balcony moment, and it was curated. There's no doubt that after a busy weekend she was in pain, but she came out on the balcony with Charles, Camilla, the Cambridges and their children.
And here was the Elizabeth line when she opened it, and Mary and I were talking earlier about how that plaque had to be changed because it was Prince Edward who was meant to open it, and only later in the day did they say, oh, actually the Queen is going to come after all, and they changed it. Mary, I was struck when you were talking to Emily in Windsor just now about the Royal Windsor Horse Show. I was there, and again, it was another one of those events we didn't know for sure whether the Queen would turn up, and then we were sitting in the outdoor arena there, and the Queen's car came in, the national anthem played. Now, look, of course there's going to be support for the Queen at a horse show in Windsor, but it was just, like, infectious, and how this is the picture of her arriving here. How she was able to do that. And I distinctly remember she stayed up until about 10:30, 11:15, because she
Look at that
was
smile.
having fun. She was enjoying what she so very much enjoyed, which was horses, and that, you know, look at that smile on that face there. She had such a great evening. Stayed up really late. And I remember when she drove past us at the end, everyone was just, oh, the Queen's still up, and it's 11:15 at night, and she was 96 then.
It's difficult to believe or understand that we're not going to see that smile again.
Yeah, I mean, I think monarchy is all about image. It has been for centuries. And actually, if we think about the last year, it's just been, there's been so many amazing images of the Queen. I mean, that balcony moment with the future, the succession, the future king, our king now, the future king, William and George, but also the Queen and Paddington. If we think about that, another iconic moment that, you know, there was just, it was as if the Queen had a sense that this year was her big one. Of course it was, because it was a Platinum Jubilee year, but she took moments to, like, land these iconic images. And of course, even this week, 2 days ago, there she was, appointing a new Prime Minister, making sure that she was there at the changing of the guard, the making of history, the turning of the page. I mean, incredible, remarkable.
Giving her seal of approval.
Yeah, I mean, a week we've had a new Prime Minister and a new monarch this week, both made in Scotland, as it were. I mean, it's kind of just a remarkable sense of, wow, what's going on? I think a sort of national kind of identity crisis, I think, of sorts.
We've seen new Prime Ministers, we've seen new governments, we've had general elections. What we haven't had since 1952 is a change of monarch. I mean, you were talking about coins. I even remember when my grandma would give us our pocket money, and some of the coins still had King George VI's head on, and I used to think, that's a bit old, I don't want one of those. I mean, the very thought that we're going to have to change our coins, our notes, and our stamps, and our, you know, the ER on the post boxes.
That's if we even use money in years to come,
or post letters,
or
of
indeed
course.
stamps. So, you know, again, just an illustration of the enormous change that we have seen during her reign.
And I can guarantee to you, Mary, Buckingham Palace wouldn't have these crowds outside it were it not for that statement tonight. And again, you know, people are drawn, drawn to this this building, which symbolises the monarchy and symbolises everything they've known for 70 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that statement from Charles, the King, and of course he's, as the Queen was, a grieving child, and also now stepping into this huge job, trying to step into his mother's tiny shoes, but, you know, at the same time, enormous shoes. I think it was interesting, that statement, it wasn't signed off CR, Charles Rex, Charles the King. It was almost like it was just held back slightly. It was a statement, of course he's king, but it's almost like he didn't want to quite sign off yet in that way to acknowledge quite what he's exactly.
And some of that formality that we all grew up with the royal family has sort of loosened, hasn't it, in recent years? And he's called her in public mummy. And I remember that was a big moment when that first happened, and that was in the Diamond Jubilee, wasn't it?
Diamond Jubilee or Golden?
I
think Diamond Jubilee was it, when you said, yes, Her Majesty the Queen, mummy, and the whole crowd cheered. And we had a not dissimilar event. Again, I distinctly remember it being right about there in Buckingham Palace. At the time, there were big stands all built and temporary seating, and Prince Charles, as he was then, said, if we all cheer loudly enough, then Mummy will hear you at Windsor Castle, and you know, the crowds did cheer, and that was a phenomenal event that evening, that party on the Saturday night when the palace was lit up and there were drones in the sky, and as Anna just mentioned, the Paddington Bear moment, all hard to appreciate now that we're never going to see any of that again. We're never going to see the Queen stand on the balcony of Buckingham Palace again. Yeah,
and, you know, those of us, we do all sorts of different stories in our work, don't we, as journalists? But everyone would get excited when they met the Queen. You know, no matter what your political views were, and I was lucky enough to meet her a few times, as you were too, and I dare say you did too, and you would be excited, and the most cynical journalists would be a little bit thrilled.
That was what was remarkable about her, and that's what we see, that we will never have another monarch like this, because what the Queen managed to do in this, you know, modern age of glaring media and, you know, all that came with that. She managed to retain this elusive charisma. She managed to retain the mystique and the magic of monarchy. Even, you know, the uproar when, if somebody touched the Queen, oh no, you can't touch the Queen. The reverence of the royal body. Exactly, Michelle Obama.
Why did you do that? And actually, the Queen would have not been offended by it one bit.
Michelle Obama said she put her arm around her back again.
Because she felt like she wanted to protect an elderly lady.
But in fact, it's this idea that the royal body is sanctified, is special, and that's the sort of medieval, it's an age-old thing. And this remarkable, tiny woman managed to maintain this kind of mystique of monarchy and magic when we're all so cynical now that institutions are being challenged and questioned, and, you know, in every walk of life we're thinking about equality and diversity and inclusivity. The monarchy is about none of those things. It's about privilege, it's about birthright. But actually, somehow the Queen has maintained the popularity of the monarchy, and it's survived and indeed thrived. What comes next, who knows? But the fact, her legacy is, I mean, that moment on the balcony where she's got her future family there, her heirs, and tonight the country kind of is gulping, monarchists or not. It's a moment of, it's national wobble time.
Yes, and that institution, which was representing privilege, which has kind of come up quite a lot in recent days with the whole Harry and Meghan. You know, she married into this very privileged this privileged prince, Prince Harry, who we understand has just arrived at Balmoral. Now, that could be him. I think that actually might have been the other princes arriving earlier. Is that Prince Harry? Yeah, that was Prince Harry arriving just a few moments ago. Now, let's just reflect on the fact that his brother, Prince William, was able to be there, but Prince Harry himself was not. And I don't know what impact that might have, and there's that schism in the family in any case at the moment between the brothers William and Harry. If he wasn't able to get there in time to say goodbye to his beloved
we're going to join my
then,
colleague
I think he will feel
for more special coverage
that very
following the
deeply.
death of Her Majesty the Queen.
So much to discuss. It's endlessly fascinating, isn't it? And desperately sad tonight, I think, for everyone. It is 8 o'clock. You're watching a special programme on ITV News on the day the Queen Elizabeth II died. At 6:30 this evening, news of her death was confirmed in a statement from Buckingham Palace. It read, "The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow." As reaction continues to reach us from right across the world, we're going to pause to remember our longest ever serving monarch. Our royal editor Chris Shipp looks back on the life of Queen Elizabeth II.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
On her 21st birthday, Princess Elizabeth made a speech that would define her life. She didn't know then she'd become our longest-serving monarch. When she was born to the second son of King George V and Queen Mary, she was never expected to become queen. What she was expecting was a relatively simple life, a country girl in a family on the periphery of the monarchy, with a focus on dogs and, of course, horses. But the sudden coronation of her father George VI, following the abdication of his brother, changed everything. And with the early death of her beloved father, Elizabeth became queen at the age of just 25. She stood by those early promises she made on her birthday in 1947, through good times and bad. She was the head of state, someone who offered to so many identity, continuity and pride. an embodiment of Britain and of the Commonwealth. And as she promised, she did serve her whole life. With Prince Philip by her side, she was a modern, glamorous monarch at a time of great post-war change. What she might have lacked due to her age and her inexperience, she made up for from the outset with a formidable commitment to the role. The fascination with the couple stretched far beyond the UK. She was more than just a British queen. She was Queen of the Realms and head of the Commonwealth, a growing association of former colonies and newly independent nations. The Commonwealth, to which she was so committed, began with just 8 countries. Today, it has more than 50. So she visited, she toured, she travelled far and wide. She would be seen in the countries which were new republics. And she would be seen in the countries where she remained head of state. More than just a British queen. She was She would travel year in, year out, right up until 2015. That year, she had returned to her one-time home with Prince Philip in Malta. This meeting of Commonwealth leaders would be her last trip overseas, shortly before her 90th birthday.
Ladies and gentlemen, I feel enormously proud of what the Commonwealth has achieved, and all of it within my lifetime.
But while this queen had a commonwealth rather than an empire, she did have a significant position on the world stage. The world's politicians wanted to meet her. Prime ministers and presidents came and went, but this queen would remain. She walked a discreet political line. World leaders knew the value of an audience with Queen Elizabeth, the Queen. At times she became the world's diplomat, at others a healer of past wrongs, meeting leaders of countries who'd fought against the British Crown, even shaking hands with a former commander of the IRA, the group who'd killed members of her own family.
Profound.
And she welcomed the leader of communist China to the heart of the British monarchy, Buckingham Palace, as Britain opened up to the Far East. She was the mother of the nation, someone everyone knew, as well as a mother to her own 4 children. She had to protect her private life as well as theirs. Never an easy task when their lives were also lived in the public domain. Particularly for Prince Charles, our future king. His marriage was at first a cause for celebration, but then of heartache. So too for her second son, another marriage that would end in failure. Both divorces happened in 1992, as well as the fire which ravaged Windsor Castle, a year the Queen acknowledged was among the most difficult.
1992 is not a year on which I shall look back with undiluted pleasure. In the words of one of my more sympathetic correspondents, it has turned out to be an annus horribilis.
If anyone in the institution had thought the worst was behind them, they would be proved wrong. A more testing moment was to come later that decade. The Queen remained at Balmoral with Diana's 2 sons, her grandsons, to protect them from the public gaze. The grief in the rest of the country turned to anger. It healed only when the Queen returned to meet the mourners and found the words to quell the discontent.
She was an exceptional and gifted human being. In good times and bad, she never lost her capacity to smile and laugh, nor to inspire others with her warmth and kindness. I admired and respected her for her energy and commitment to others, and especially for her devotion to her 2 boys.
The Queen knew that in her role as head of nation she was a focus of both national grief and national celebration.
Good evening, Sir Bond.
When London hosted the 2012 Olympics, it was a moment when the formality of her role was suspended momentarily to amuse those watching in the stadium and around the world. Being there for the nation when it needed her most was something she learned was an important part of the job, every bit as important as the formal state occasions. When, in 2020, the deaths from the COVID pandemic were spiralling, she spoke to and for her people, using a phrase which meant a lot to her, having lived through World War II.
Better days will return. We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again.
The Queen's own wartime contribution as a member of the Auxiliary Territorial Service taught her lessons in duty and perseverance which lasted a lifetime. As Commander-in-Chief, honouring those who fought for the country was always a priority. She attended service after service, commemorating the memory of the fallen and all victims of conflict. As the years went by, those who served and survived D-Day became fewer and fewer. The Queen marked each anniversary, becoming visibly moved at the 50th commemoration in northern France in 1994.
Veterans of the Normandy campaign, you deserve your nation's thanks. May we, your fellow countrymen, be worthy of what you did for us.
Right to the end, Remembrance Sunday remained one of her most important events, even when she was no longer able to lay her wreath, even when she was forced to cancel her attendance at the cenotaph. Her family had all served in the military, as tradition dictated, and she was head of an ever-growing dynasty. In her later years, attention shifted to the future king and the 2 who would follow, Princes William and George. The succession of the House of Windsor had been secured with William's marriage to Kate, a couple who did find a workable balance between public and private. The Queen's only daughter Anne, the Princess Royal, found happiness in her marriage second time around. And in later years, the Queen was particularly close to her youngest son, Prince Edward, and his wife, Sophie. But there were many difficult family moments too. Harry's marriage to Meghan brought a smile to the nation, but masked the couple's personal unhappiness. They brought Archie to Windsor Castle, but left Britain 6 months later. A very public and painful parting of ways. Then there was Andrew. She loved her son so dearly, but had to relieve him of his royal duties. The Queen couldn't allow the wider monarchy to be damaged by the serious allegations he denied, and Andrew paid out to settle with his accuser. In 2021, after 73 years of marriage, the Queen lost Prince Philip, the man she once called her strength and stay. He'd been her constant, by her side throughout. He died aged 99, leaving her to reign without him. The nation's thoughts were with the Queen, as alone she said goodbye for the very last time. She drew on her deep personal faith that day, as she had promised.
I shall not have strength to carry out this resolution alone, unless you join in it with me, as I now invite you to do. I know that your support will be unfailingly given. God help me to make good my vow, and God bless all of you who are willing to share in it.
When the world looks back on the 20th and 21st centuries, one woman, more than any other, embodied the age. The world kept changing, and Queen Elizabeth slowly and carefully changed with it. The second Elizabethan era is now at an end.
Extraordinary, isn't it? To think that that enormous part of our history has now moved on, and that was our Royal Editor, Chris Shipp, on the life of Queen Elizabeth II. And fascinating, so much remarkable footage in that, and so much history in that. And I just wanted to ask you about that footage, the black and white footage which we had at the beginning of the piece and also towards the end, when she was 21 years old, she was in South Africa addressing her people as we would eventually be.
Knowing then what was to come, the job of Queen, the job of head of state. It came much sooner than she had anticipated, but there she was, sat in Cape Town on the occasion of her 21st birthday. I think it says 1974 there. We should probably change 2 of those digits to 1947, of course, because that was when she was, that was the occasion of her 21st birthday. But yeah, that speech, I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and the service of our great imperial family. Well, the imperial family moved on into a commonwealth of nations, but her life wasn't short. It was a long life, and one that she devoted to this job. And you look back at those images from a different era, 1947. She had sailed down to South Africa with her father, the King, and mother, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Consort, and her sister, Margaret Rose. She had to leave Prince Philip behind, although we now know that she'd already agreed to marry him. But they knew that she had to make this speech, not to Britain and the UK, but to the world. And that was a very important speech that she made when she devoted her whole life, which is why the Queen, despite the difficulties with her mobility and her health that we've been talking about in the last year to 18 months, she would never abdicate. She kept doing her duty, as we've discussed, right to the very end, with the appointment of the Prime Minister 2 days before her death.
And a role that was, we often talk, don't we, of the huge privilege and the wealth and so on, the palaces and the jewels, but it was for her all about service.
Exactly. I mean, for her, it was really simple. It was about duty and it was about service. And I think, you know, we can judge her by her own account. There, she said, it's all for me. I'm going to be devoted, whether my life's long or short, to your service. And so she has been. So,
and then we have the on her way to the coronation.
You know, that was Prince Charles looking out of the window there as he was just a little 4-year-old boy, and now our king. And he watched his mother in 1953 there, and his father leave for that coronation at Westminster Abbey. We were discussing, weren't we, about the anointing that happens, that ancient ceremony, which we will see again in the coming months.
Yeah, and this is where the sort of medieval mystique of monarchy is going to come crashing into the reality of modernity, because actually what we, you know, at the heart of the coronation service is this moment of anointing. And of course it was the Queen's coronation, which was the first one to be televised. So, you know, groundbreaking then. And in a way that sort of, bookends her reign, how television has become, media has become so important. But in that moment, in the anointing, even the cameras couldn't focus on the moment where the oil marked on her shoulders, forehead, signifying that she was sort of divinely appointed. It was a laying of hands. And in that moment, she became something other. And she took that on very, very seriously.
She had very strong faith, didn't she?
Really strong faith. And it's important to point out that for her, actually, and indeed Charles, she was, of course, Supreme Governor of the Church of England, but actually faith for her was much broader than that. There was a real sense of ecumenical devotion, actually wanting to engage with other faith leaders. But yes, at the heart of her life was that pledge at 21 and then her coronation oath.
And you do wonder, at a time when we are a much less deferential nation than we were in 1952, 1953, how, when we come to the next coronation, what people are going to make of this divine right to be monarch, to be head of state, and the anointing with oil. I mean, these are ancient rituals that took place in Westminster Abbey that date back hundreds and hundreds of years that many, many monarchs have been through before. We are about to get another one. And just looking at these, this was the last time we had a coronation, 1953. And it's remarkable to think that it's about to happen again.
And we're all going to need a history lesson, I'm delighted to say. Because, what is this all about? What are all the symbols about for the coronation? Because actually, as you say, most of us don't remember it, we weren't around, or those of us who were, it was so many years ago.
Well, the crowding round in small sitting rooms to watch a very tiny black and white TV, or buying a TV for the occasion.
And how does that how is that going to land, that medieval service that's shrouded in, age-old custom?
And we are a multi-faith society now, aren't we? We have changed beyond all
Such a different nation to the one we were in 1953.
But I think what's important to remember is, we can't simply just change how it works. It's not like somebody going, oh, well, let's loosen up this to kind of reflect a multi-faith age, because by Act of Parliament, things would have to be changed and reversed. That can't happen now. So by by the things like the Bill of Rights, there's certain oaths that have to be made, certain statements have to be made. We can't change up the coronation. So we all need to understand and we need to explain it. And that will begin this new chapter in trying to understand and accommodate the monarchy in modern Britain. And we haven't really had a conversation about how that all fits in, because at the end of the day, we've been like, it's the Queen, we respect her. Whether you're a monarchist or not, people think, the woman has devoted her life in service, and she does represent us pretty well. Now I think people are going to go, what's it for? What's it about? What's it saying about Britain in the world? What is all this hocus pocus, as some people will see it, with all these medieval superstitious customs? Or is it still something that binds the country together? I think we're only going to find that out in the next few weeks, months, and probably years.
How will it sit in a multi-ethnic, multi-heritage United Kingdom of 2022? And I think you're right to say it will trigger a conversation about the place of monarchy in a modern-day society. They've got Spain and the Netherlands and Sweden and Norway. They have these conversations as well. But will this event today, will it trigger a debate about the place of monarchy in Britain in 2022?
But I think for the coming days it will be much more fundamental than that, won't it? It will just be mourning for a lady, a woman, a mother, a grandmother, and in a way the mother of the nation. I remember at the Queen Mother's funeral, an old serviceman, a very, very elderly gentleman, said to me, she wasn't just the Queen's mother, she was all our mothers.
I think that's right. And I think, she was a lady of 96. She died surrounded by her family in a Scottish, residence. So that in itself is not a tragedy. But of course, what it signifies is a great loss. But also, I was thinking, for me, it made me actually think about my grandparents, for example, because of course they were alive, they knew the Queen, and it suddenly makes you feel one step away from people that we've loved and lost, because she's been the kind of thread that's bound generations of us together. And I think now we are a bit all at sea. Literally, we've got a new Prime Minister, we've got a new monarch. What are we about?
In the same week.
In the same week.
I mean, who would have predicted
Elliot
such things? And actually,
said
I think people will now have an
Bye-bye.
opportunity to express their gratitude, their respect for the Queen, because not only will there be what's called lying in rest in Edinburgh, we're expecting the coffin to be moved first to the Palace of Holyrood House and then depart in procession to St Giles Cathedral. Anyone know the beautiful city of Edinburgh that is on the High Street, or what becomes the Royal Mile, right up to the castle? There will be a lying in rest there. So people can, if they so wish, choose to file past. And then we are expecting, and this is all to be signed off by the King in due course, but when the coffin comes to London, there will be a lying in state. Now,
At Westminster Hall, like
Westminster
the Queen
Hall,
Mother?
like what happened with the Queen Mother, like what happened with Winston Churchill, to which world leaders will be invited. The President of the United States, the King of Jordan, the President of France. We are about to see, the world's leaders descend on London because they want to pay their respects to the Queen. But in addition to that, how many people will choose to do the same? We know from the Queen Mother's lying in state that the lines of people wanting to file past her coffin went all the way along the river, over the bridge and back down the other side. What's going to happen with the Queen? And I suspect hundreds of thousands of people will want to pay their respects after 70 years of reign.
Yes, I suspect you may well be right. We will continue talking in just a moment, but as we're seeing that people are gathering at Buckingham Palace, as you mentioned, Chris, and Windsor Castle this evening, the Queen had an amazing way of bringing together people from across the generations, from different countries and indeed cultures. Well, let's go first to our UK editor, Paul Brand, who's at Buckingham Palace. Paul, very moving scenes already there this evening.
Yeah, Mary, thousands upon thousands of people have already made their way here to the gates of Buckingham Palace. They're just circling around here, paying their respects, walking down in relative darkness, relative quiet this evening. Some of them making their way home from work, wanted to come past Buckingham Palace to pay their respects. Others have made a special trip this evening to come down here and lay flowers. I was standing on the Mall, actually, just a few yards away when that news was announced earlier this evening that Queen Elizabeth had died, and all around me mobile phones were pinging with that news, that the modern way of announcing the passing of a monarch who, of course, had reigned since well before mobile phones were even conceived of. But many people, too, hadn't actually heard the news until it was broken to them, until we spoke to them as they made their way down. And despite her age and, of course, the fact that we had known that she'd been in ill health for some time, I think the overriding emotion really was one of shock. People continually saying to me that the Queen is all that they've ever known in their lives. One card simply reading, "We've had you for far longer than we deserved to have you for," as all of them reacted in shock and sadness to her passing.
No! We've got to be joking.
Sorry to tell you, but she has passed away.
Oh my God. We're just
walking down. We've come to London to go to the theatre, and then we heard, oh, that's just awful. Oh, look, oh God.
The Queen has passed away.
Oh no, I haven't. Oh my God.
I'm so sorry to tell you that she passed away.
Really? Just now? I've just been watching news. It's just awful. I just can't quite believe it. She just had a new prime minister in 2 days ago, and she looked okay. But yeah, well, it'll be a sad loss. She's been amazing.
Well, one of the most moving scenes here this evening is over on the Mall, where hundreds, perhaps thousands by now, of black cabs have lined up along that Mall with their lights on this evening. And they did the same for the Duke of Edinburgh when he passed away, and they wanted to come down this evening to do it for the Queen too. Of course, many of them have happily made many a journey here, picking up tourists as they've come to see the Queen, and many of them have made a livelihood out of the love and affection and interest that there has been in Queen Elizabeth. And tonight they're paying their respects in quiet, lining up on the Mall. Many of them, I've got to say, very emotional, some even in tears this evening. What is it you're doing down here today?
It's for the Queen. We did it for Prince Philip as well when he passed. It's
a lot to take in, isn't it? It's a big moment.
She's the only constant we've all had in our lives. I just want to show me respect. Yeah.
Well, there are so many people down here this evening that even the phone signals have jammed, and just more and more keep arriving. Even though it's raining here outside Buckingham Palace, you can see a sea of umbrellas here circling the palace, stopping, laying flowers, paying their respects. And I suspect this will be a trend that continues here well into the night and, of course, over the coming days too.
Paul Brand, outside Buckingham Palace, thank you. And yes, I suspect he is correct, and we're going to be seeing this over the next few days to come. It is a very similar scene at Windsor Castle this evening. And our correspondent Emily Morgan is there. And Emily, you were saying earlier how many people have already gathered there. It's a moment in history, isn't it?
It is a moment in history, and I've been really struck by this huge outpouring of grief already. I mean, residents here and tourists had already been gathering this afternoon, I think probably hoping for an update for some good news. But when that sad news of the Queen's death came just after 6:30, it was quite incredible how many people just suddenly flooded here to Windsor Castle. You can probably see behind me a lot of flowers being laid or have been laid. Now the crowds have gone. There are no crowds here right now. There's a small group of people standing here just in front of me. It's getting bigger as we speak, but police have moved the crowds from here, Castle Hill, to the Long Walk, which is just a few streets away. Now I understand hundreds of people are gathering there. They are leaving flowers there. But from what I'm seeing, I think people here in Windsor are just feeling the Queen's death extremely acutely. They see her as part of their community, as a neighbour, as the heart of Windsor, someone who they have always known to live here. A lot of them won't remember King George VI or Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, living here. So I think there's a real sense of shock that things have quite quickly changed. We spoke to some people here, residents here earlier, and this was their sort of overwhelming emotion.
Kind of a bit surreal at the moment. I think it's all kicking in for everyone. But I'm sure it's going to take a few days for everyone to kind of really realise what's going on.
I thought she was a great queen. Thought she did a good job for the country, and she'll be missed.
It's a sad day.
Yeah, I've been a resident in Windsor all my life, so just watching the TV, and it was a shock. I suppose it shouldn't have come as a shock, but it still does feel like that, and there's certainly an atmosphere here now where you can sense that people are sort of trying to take it all in.
She's worked so hard for everybody, and she's had to cope with a lot, especially recently.
As a mother, she's had to cope with a hell of a lot.
Well, you can just hear in the sentiment of what they say, that you just can't underestimate the loss that residents here in Windsor feel. I just think that people are standing here now, they're just coming heads bowed, they're looking over, they're looking bereft. I think a lot of people are just trying to take in this news, to unite, to try and process the very fact that the Queen has gone.
Emily Morgan at Windsor, thank you. Back here in the studio, I've got Anna Whitelock and, of course, Chris Shipp with me. And I just wanted to start by referring to what Joe Biden and Jill Biden, the US president, said. He said she was a steadying presence and a source of comfort and pride for generations of Britons, including many who have never known their country without her. And what we saw outside Buckingham Palace and outside Windsor, the comments of people who seem to be going through genuine shock and grief. It's extraordinary.
And even the taxi driver that we just saw from Paul Brand's position on the Mall. I mean, just that genuine, heartfelt, instinctive emotion.
Yeah.
You know, from taxi drivers who immediately went to the Mall to pay their respects and then found themselves getting emotional when they were talking about her.
I've just been thinking a lot about the kind of echoes with the last Elizabethan reign. Elizabeth I, who of course reigned for a very long time, and she died in 1603, and I was looking back at some of the poems that were written and the accounts that describe the wailing of people that never had known another sovereign. You know, Queen Elizabeth, you know, became queen in 1558. She reigned until 1603, and there was a real sense of this old woman, almost 70 when she died, which was incredibly old at that point, and just a sense of no one quite knowing how to react. And ironically, the new king was, of course, in Scotland. It was James VI of Scotland who became James I of England too. And just that sense of a passing of an era, an age. And of course, we've now lived through, and we haven't really felt we've been living through it because it's just been our time that we've been living, but it's been an Elizabethan era. And I think Joe Biden, didn't he, quoted today or referred to that we'd been living through not just a reign, but actually a whole kind of epoch, an age.
Yes.
Yeah.
An age of unprecedented human advancement and the forward march of human dignity.
It's actually something that the Australian Prime Minister has been referring to as well. Now, the interesting context behind that is, of course, that Australia is a Commonwealth realm. That means that the Queen is the head of state of Australia. And in their most recent elections, the Australians elected a Prime Minister who is a Republican who wants to replace the Queen as head of state. But he wrote, similarly to Joe Biden, today marks the end of an era, the close of the second Elizabethan age. This time of mourning will pass, but the deep respect and warm regard in which Australians always held Her Majesty will never fade. And it is, you know, this is coming from a Prime Minister who no longer wants the Queen or the British monarch as head of state. But we're talking here about that personal affection that people have for the Queen, from a taxi driver on the Mall to the Republican Prime Minister of Australia. I think that is a sentiment that we will see again and again.
And of course, the fact that she has passed away in Scotland does have some sort of significance, doesn't it? You know, as we're talking again about United Kingdom and Nicola Sturgeon is
what a week for Scotland.
Yes,
I mean,
quite.
Scotland was where the new Prime Minister was appointed by the Queen. So it's made a new Prime Minister, it's now had a new monarch. And at the moment, you know, the monarch of the United Kingdom is in Scotland. The late Queen is in Scotland, and the story of this new reign begins in Scotland. Now, whatever that might mean, however this reign will play out, there is significance in that. And at the moment, all eyes are, as they were in 1603, on London, waiting for the arrival of the new monarch, but also in Scotland, in Edinburgh, as people anticipated the change, the departure of the King to London. So, really, really interesting parallels and echoes, I think.
And even the First Minister of Scotland has been talking, and she doesn't often talk about the UK because of obviously her political position when it comes to Scotland's part of the United Kingdom. But Nicola Sturgeon wrote tonight, the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth is a profoundly sad moment for the UK and the Commonwealth and around the world. Her life was one of extraordinary dedication and service. And I think, you know, I would support Anna in what she's just said about the fact that the United Kingdom Prime Minister has just been invited by the Queen to form a new government, and the death of this much-loved Queen and the start of King Charles's reign is all happening in Aberdeenshire, all happening in that castle on that estate next to the River Dee.
I think it's Shakespearean, isn't it?
It is, and I mean, some of us, you know, might have written recent exam papers, and often it's like, what makes a successful monarch's reign? And whether it's in the 12th century, the 13th century, whenever, it was often if they survived or they, you know, died in their own bed was the expression, and then that they passed the throne on safely and securely. And the Queen, you know, died peacefully. She's passed the succession on. She's got a line of heirs. And we can say that glibly, but actually we have to remember that this is at a time when we're in a world of such profound societal change. You know, institutions have been challenged and questioned. And so the greatest achievement in many ways, I think, for the Queen is that the monarchy has survived and indeed thrived. She has a future series of heirs. She has tried to make the monarchy relevant as far as it can within the kind of strictures of being this an anachronistic institution born centuries ago. And the fact that that's still retained popularity, I mean, that is an incredible achievement in a world that's so different even from when she became Queen.
The challenge, of course, is with the younger population who don't support monarchy in the way in which older populations do. In fact, I think just before the Jubilee, I remember seeing a survey that said something like a third of people aged 16 to 24 supported the monarchy, but equal numbers, a third, supported the UK having an elected head of state. That is in among a lot of challenges, and we'll come to this in due course, I'm sure, but in terms of the challenges facing the new king, I think that will be one of them.
It will be very difficult to replace. I mean, you can't even imagine such a
And I don't think he'll attempt to either.
No.
And I think he will know that, you know, he's become the monarch, you know, at the age of 74, I think he is right now. And that is very different to his mother, who became queen at the age of 25. So he will know that he's not replacing her, but he will have to, you know, he will have to make his reign in his own image, and it'll be very interesting to see how he does that going forward. But, you know, we might be jumping ahead of time here, because we're talking about someone who's just lost his mother.
Yes, absolutely.
And has just, at that moment, become king. You know, it's quite how you process that, and I'm sure he's had many years to prepare for it, but it's difficult for us to process it, and it's happening to him personally.
And in the public gaze, and tomorrow he will have to come out and be the king, and he's lost his mum.
And also, I mean, I think it's important to reflect that, you know, everybody's moved up. So with the passing of the Queen, William and Kate, who I think their kids today started school, suddenly, soon, they will be the Prince and Princess of Wales, and next they will be heirs. William will now be heir to the throne, and the level of expectation that comes with that.
Yes, and we were running images earlier of the Cambridge children arriving at school today, and you know they started the day in a certain position in terms of the succession to the crown, and they have all moved up a notch. And we were talking earlier, weren't we, that William and Kate are now called the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall and Cambridge, because the Dukedom of Cornwall, at the moment of the Queen's death, has passed to Prince William.
As well as all the other titles as well, which just go on and on, don't they?
Yes, don't ask me to
No,
name them all, but there is always, for example, Prince Charles, as he was, and Camilla were always called the Duke and Duchess of Rothesay when they were in Scotland, because that was their official title when they were north of the border.
Yes, this is
which is now a title that I think I'm right in saying that Prince William has inherited, along with the Dukedom of Cornwall.
Yeah, it's all
so as he's currently in
complex,
Scotland, that would mean that Prince William is currently the Duke of Rothesay. So there's all of those changes.
But in the midst of all of this, and for some people, they'll be looking and go, oh, this is exactly the point. It's all about titles we don't understand, and how is this even relevant? It's all about privilege. The kind of irony is that we now have a king who's in his mid-70s, and actually, in some ways, is a man for the moment. I mean, his great passion, the thing that he's been banging on about all his life, is the environment. Mm-hmm. And if there was one thing that kind of unites people around the world, it's concern around the environment. So there is, and I think the Queen, the late Queen, was very proud of the fact that actually both her son and her grandson had continued actually the work of her husband, their father and grandfather, in championing the cause of the environment.
I'll just bring you a statement from the leader of the Roman Catholic Church. We've been talking about the Queen's position, the one she had and that Prince Charles will have as Supreme Governor of the Church of England. But Pope Francis has sent a telegram to King Charles III, it says, on the death of the Queen, and he paid tribute to the Queen's steadfast witness of faith and assures the King of his prayers, as the Pope put it, as you now take up your high responsibilities.
Back to this question of faith and her significance being so much broader than monarch of our country, so much more.
Faith and constancy, but I also think, I mean, I think have seen the last of a certain type of monarch, because, you know, yes, there'll be some people who say we should have an elected head of state, but actually there's also a middle ground position, which I hear a lot from younger people, which is actually the idea of a head of state who doesn't speak out on things. That's bonkers. Like, they have a platform. Why would they not speak out about the big issues of the day, whether it be the environment, whether it be racism and so on? So maybe there's a moment where actually the idea that we've never known what the Queen thinks about things, that perhaps, I mean, which was what people kind of respected so much in her, maybe that's no longer sustainable. Maybe Charles is now going to have some space, very carefully, because of course there's all the legacy of him being seen as a bit of a meddler, but actually
a very
to
frequent visitor.
many
Every
people.
summer
And in that sense,
she would come and spend a week here at
centuries-old
Holyrood Palace
institution
before
could be very relevant right now.
Talking of centuries old, a development in the last few moments that the palace has confirmed that the Accession Council, something that is centuries old, which is also the principal proclamation for the new king, which incidentally doesn't happen at Buckingham Palace, it happens at St James's Palace, because in hierarchy, and we will talk a lot about hierarchy in the coming days, St James's Palace is the most senior palace. The Accession Council is going to take place on Saturday. It was always meant to take place the day after death, but as we were saying earlier, because the announcement has been made so late in the day, things in the programme have shifted. So the Accession Council and the principal proclamation will now happen on Saturday morning.
OK, and that will set in motion the rest of the developments that have been set in stone.
You have to have a proclamation in Edinburgh and in Belfast and in Cardiff as well.
What does that mean? What is a proclamation? What does it look like?
It's basically a tweet before there were tweets. It's somebody, back in the day, it was a town crier. It's someone standing at the gates around the cities and saying, declaring the fact that we have a new king and announcing the royal style, so the full name. So it's making official. Of course, we have a king now, but it's proclaiming the truth, proclaiming the news that we have a new monarch. So we will see on that day there are quite a lot of... I think they are letting the cameras in. That's the suggestion for the Accession Council.
Yes. So they stand on a balcony of St James's Palace overlooking Marlborough Place, I think it is, for people who know their central London geography, where they make this principal proclamation of King Charles III. We did think at some stage we would have to wait until then to find out how King Charles will rule, or what name he will rule under, but of course that was made clear earlier by both the Prime Minister Liz Truss and later by the King's office that he will reign as King Charles III.
And so sort of top tip for people, it's going to all be happening at the St James's Palace, which is the court of St James. So that's really where all eyes turn.
Which, of course, is what ambassadors are called. I was at the US Embassy recently, and there's a big sign up there saying, had a list of all the, what we would call US ambassadors to the UK, but they are called ambassadors to the court of St James.
Yes.
And that's something that the Queen, we're talking about the Queen working till the very end. She received new ambassadors to the court of St James virtually often, because she was at Windsor Castle and they were at Buckingham Palace. But those events were kind of happening week in, week out, despite the Queen's age of 96.
Well, and we also have the sort of significant, slightly odd situation that actually the Accession Council was cancelled, so our Prime Minister hasn't actually been sworn of the Accession Council. I think that was going to happen yesterday.
So the Queen cancelled last night.
It's interesting you were mentioning having met the US ambassador, and obviously, as we've discussed, there's a reaction coming in from all around the world. In just a moment, we're going to go to our correspondent Robert Moore, who's in Washington. Robert, what has been the reaction out there? We know that the Bidens have issued a statement.
That's right. I mean, I think from the range, the breadth and the depth of reaction from around the world, it is extraordinarily clear that the Queen was inspiration not just to Britain, not just to her realms, not just to the Commonwealth, but many other nations as well, including the United States. This was a country that the Queen visited 8 times. She knew and had met 14 of the last 15 American presidents. And the current American president, Joe Biden, has issued a long and deeply moving tribute to the Queen, in part which reads, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was more than a monarch. She defined an era. In a world of constant change, he wrote, she was a steadying presence and a source of comfort and pride for generations of Britons. And he went on to say that Queen Elizabeth II led always with grace, an enduring commitment to duty, and the incomparable power of her example. His predecessor, Donald Trump, has also issued a statement saying what a grand and beautiful lady she was. There was nobody like her, perhaps one of his less controversial statements. Flags here at Congress and around this city are now flying at half-mast. One prominent American magazine has called the Queen tonight a queen of the world, describing her as a modern global monarch. And I think that does capture a sense of how much impact her passing is having right around the world.
Robert, thank you. Robert Moore there in Washington. And that phrase Robert used, a modern global monarch. What an extraordinary thing to say about someone who was 96. Modern.
Yeah,
but she was.
She was. Well, she was Queen of the world. I mean, I think people everywhere, even though, she's Queen of the United Kingdom, she's Queen of Canada, you talk to anybody, they just go, the Queen.
Yes.
Yeah.
But of course, there's other queens,
Yes.
but actually she's just the Queen.
Even in Germany, she's referred to as die Queen because that is the Queen. There is no other, as far as they are concerned. And of course, there are other monarchies in Europe, or other monarchies in different parts of the world. But there was a title of a book recently, "The Queen of the World," because she has travelled so widely. She, even to this day, she remained a queen of so many countries. Remarkable, really, that at age 96, as you say, she would be referred to a modern queen of the world.
We'll have all read that book written by an author called Robert Hardman some years ago, and it was entitled Our Queen. And I think that was also very telling, wasn't it? Because she is the Queen, but she was our Queen. And there was a sense of, well, ownership, I suppose.
She's everybody's art. It's like, whose art? It's like everybody's the world, I think if you're in Australia, she's the Queen, she's ours. I think there was this sense that, people grew up with her. She became Queen in her 20s. And, she's lived on into her 90s. There's just, that's remarkable. But also what struck me, for so long, she hasn't really changed. The kind of, she didn't lose her hair. The sort of, outline of her remained really the same. There didn't need to be that many new casts on, coins and stamps because actually her silhouette didn't change very much.
And she established her image, didn't she, very early on? Those bright colours, mono blocked colours, didn't she? And she once said, "I need to be seen to be believed."
Queen needs to be seen, exactly.
But
she was, wasn't she?
But this is again the idea of what a monarch, does. The importance of a monarch. You have to be seen to make, it has to be seen to be believed, and she knew that. And so, even though she was a tiny figure, she knew that if someone saw her and locked eyes on her, it would be a moment. And this is the power of the royal charisma. And for all of Charles's strengths, he's not going to have the kind of charisma that the Queen had, that you had an audience with her. And world leaders wanted to have an audience with her. When she didn't make it to the Environment Summit in, was it Glasgow?
COP26,
COP26. There was
another thing she had to pull out of course,
a sense of,
yes.
I met an ambassador a few months ago and he was new and I said, "What are you excited about? What are you looking forward to?" He said, "I just want to meet the Queen." He said, "I want my audience with the Queen." I'm really hoping it won't be cancelled because of COVID or whatever. He just wanted to meet her.
But I also think it's, we have to remember that she does have weekly audiences with the Prime Minister. Yeah. And she has had so much wisdom, doubtless, to share. She's lived through so much. There's been so many parallels of late about the 1970s and so on. The Queen lived through all of that. Yeah. But now the new Prime Minister...
That's why Prime Ministers valued their audience with the Queen. Yeah. It was in private and it was with someone w'd been there and seen it and done it and seen crises come and go.
Who never spilled the beans. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there has been I think you'll agree, a rather wonderful moment at Buckingham Palace, which we have managed to capture on film. And really, I think, illustrates the strength of feeling that is beginning to emerge tonight. Just a few minutes ago outside a very, very rainy Buckingham Palace. Anna and Chris, what a remarkable moment. Those three men brought the trumpets along to play outside the palace. It's going to be weird because at some point tomorrow the national anthem will play and the new words will be sung. God save our gracious King.
Yeah. I think that's going to take a lot of getting used to. There's no hiding that fact. We've all grown up with God save the Queen, and we now, and it seems odd, and you noticed my difficulty saying it earlier, Mary. His Majesty the King. We're so used to saying Her Majesty the Queen. And it's just like I say, a whole series and set of events that will change for us as a country, how we identify and how, you know, our outlook on the world.
Well, as we mourn the death of the Queen, we also look ahead. Charles has waited his entire life to become king, and today, even as he grieves for his mother, of course, it is a role that he has now taken on. No one else in history has waited to become monarch for so long. And as James Mates explains, as king, Charles will have to shift his style, which up to now has included a series of forthright views.
When you succeed the longest reigning monarch in British history, you're likely to have served a long apprenticeship. 7 decades as first in line. Heir apparent since the age of just 3, we should have a good idea what kind of king Charles is going to be. But do we?
My lords, pray be seated.
As he said emphatically to a television interviewer in 2018, Prince Charles, Prince of Wales, may be very different to King Charles III.
I'm not that stupid. I do realise that it is a separate exercise being sovereign. The idea somehow that I'm going to go on exactly the same way if I have to succeed is complete nonsense, because the two situations are completely different.
It is no mere figure of speech to say Charles learned the job at his mother's knee. Since he was a toddler, there has never been a moment in his life when he wasn't a heartbeat from the throne. Unlike his own son, there were no carefree years to build slowly towards the responsibilities of office. At 9 years old, he was both playing on dodgems and being created Prince of Wales. Invested at Carnarvon Castle at just 20, aware even then that just being himself was not an option.
At one time, you were reputed to be a very shy boy. Do you now find it much easier?
I think I do find it easier a bit, yes. I'm still fairly shy. I think one has to conquer this, you know, it's just one of those things that comes as you grow older. I don't, I think, make friends all that easily. Perhaps, you know, the position one is in builds up a little bit of a barrier. But I find now that I am making more friends, I think, yes.
A successful military career, first as a pilot in the RAF, then the Royal Navy, ending as commander of a minesweeper, gave little indication of what was to lie ahead. Because it soon became apparent that royal restraint on expressing any public opinion on anything was not going to be his style. First in his sights was modern architecture in general, the extension to the National Gallery in particular.
What is proposed seems to me like a monstrous carbuncle on the face of a much loved and elegant friend.
He went further. Modern architects had done more damage to London than the Luftwaffe, he declared, and that was just the start. The man who's now the head of the Church of England said he wanted to change the title, first adopted by Henry VIII, of Defender of the Faith. He said he would be Defender of Faith, to include other religions widely practiced in multicultural Britain.
All I have ever wanted to do, basically, is to help build bridges that could span these chasms and reunite us with the patterns of divine harmony in our souls and within the world.
It now seems he will, after all, use the original title, but the belief that his role goes beyond the Church of England to incorporate all faith is still strongly held. As he sought to define his role as Prince of Wales, Charles realised he could use his privilege to help those in need. He often went out of the way for those who were hard up, and he used his Navy severance pay to set up the Prince's Trust, encouraging young people to further their careers.
Part of my cunning plan has really been to invest in the future, in the lives and the abilities and the talents and the potential of so many young people. And now, you see, we have a growing number of remarkable young ambassadors.
The writing of dozens of letters to ministers on matters that concerned him was controversial, though hardly improper. But now that he's king, there may be no more of what he himself called meddling. The one exception, though, might be the environment. If any issue defined his long wait for the throne, it has been his passionate campaigning on environmental issues.
I know you all carry a heavy burden on your shoulders, and you do not need me to tell you that the eyes and hopes of the world are upon you, to act with all dispatch and decisively, because time has quite literally run out.
He had been early to the debate about genetically modified foods, organic farming, improved land use and sustainability. A contribution generously acknowledged by President Biden at COP26 in Glasgow.
He needs you badly.
Oh, you're very kind to say
No,
so.
not just saying it.
Yeah.
The whole thing going. That's how it all started.
Even as he had been taking on more responsibility from his mother, he hadn't shrunk from high-profile environmental tours, whether with penguins in the South Atlantic, releasing turtles onto a beach in Malta, or feeding endangered orangutans in Borneo. In this, the prince could be said to have caught the spirit of the age, been at the forefront of a movement whose reach and urgency have only increased. Such activism and meetings with activists like Greta Thunberg may now be turned down, but they're unlikely to go away. However he plays it from now on, King Charles ascends to the throne in partnership with the woman long considered to have been the love of his life. Camilla is now Queen Consort, a title confirmed by her mother-in-law during the Platinum Jubilee, resolving the long-held issue of how she should be known. Camilla will be an important, maybe even a crucial support as he embarks on the business of kingship. It's easy to forget how close his love for
Blair, Boris Johnson, too. As head of the Commonwealth, she became the most travelled monarch in history, head of state of 15 countries at the end of her reign. The Queen's death comes just over a year after the passing of her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, her consort for more than 70 years. And over the decades, the Queen was greeted by millions of people and met her subjects on thousands of engagements in the UK and well beyond. She was last pictured here at Balmoral on Tuesday, asking Liz Truss to become Prime Minister. Now, as the crown passes to a new king, Charles III, the Queen's death will be deeply felt by her family, of course, by people across the United Kingdom and millions around the world. Good evening. The reign of the longest-serving monarch in the history of the United Kingdom has come to an end with the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Buckingham Palace made the statement just after 6:30 this evening. The Queen, who was 96, passed away at Balmoral Castle in Aberdeenshire. Members of the royal family had made the journey there on the news that she was gravely ill. The Queen had been a commanding presence in British public life for more than 8 decades, and her eldest son, Charles, at the age of 73, has now become King Charles III. Buckingham Palace had issued this statement today. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and Queen consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. Well, following the death of his mother, His Majesty King Charles III released this statement. The death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms, and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world. During this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held. And a sign of that deep affection on show this evening, this live pictures from Buckingham Palace, where thousands of people have gathered in the pouring rain to mark their respects and to mark the passing of Her Majesty. Flowers laid outside the gates where, a little after 6:30, the official announcement was posted on the railings that the Queen had died at Balmoral. Well, our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell now has this account of the Queen's long life.
I here present unto you Queen Elizabeth, your undoubted Queen. Is your Majesty willing to take the oath?
She was 27 when she took the coronation oath.
I solemnly promise so to do.
She was anointed, blessed and consecrated. She took possession of a 1,200-year-old throne. She knew that it was a role from which only death could release her, and yet, when she was born, no one had thought that it would be her destiny.
We have seen the family gathering.
Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor was born on the 21st of April 1926. She was the first child of the then King's second son, the Duke of York. This was the young Princess Elizabeth at the age of 4, visiting a photographic studio in London. Her life then was comparatively carefree. It was the abdication in 1936 of her uncle, King Edward VIII, that unexpectedly placed Elizabeth in direct line to the throne. Her father became king. His coronation gave the then 11-year-old Elizabeth a foretaste of what lay in store for her. The family unit was strong. Her father, George VI, was devoted to her and she to him. Throughout her life, he was to be her inspiration. During the Second World War, as German bombs fell on Britain, the royal family symbolised the country's fight against tyranny. Elizabeth briefly joined up. She was taught how to drive and to service an army lorry. On the night Britain celebrated victory in Europe, the crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace and Elizabeth joined her family on the palace balcony. By now she was a young woman and she'd fallen in love. Her engagement to Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten was announced in July 1947. 4 months later, they were married in Westminster Abbey.
Again and again the people called for Elizabeth and Philip. Again and again they joyfully responded.
A year later, their first child, Charles, was born. 2 years after that, a daughter, Anne. The king had been in poor health. He'd been treated for lung cancer. When Elizabeth left for a visit to East Africa in February 1952, it was to be the last time she would see him.
The flag is low as the news spreads. The king is dead.
At the moment of her father's death from a heart attack, Elizabeth was in a game park in Kenya. The news that she was now queen was given to her by her husband.
Her tour of the Commonwealth cancelled. The princess we knew as a girl and watched in the even growth of her stature comes back to meet her ministers as queen.
In a way, I didn't have an apprenticeship. My father died much too young, and so it was all a very sudden kind of taking on and making the best job you can.
Britain was stunned at the loss of its wartime king. His coffin was brought by train from Sandringham to London. Elizabeth was there to receive it with her mother and sister.
And now, here comes Her Majesty.
Elizabeth's coronation in June 1953 was one of the biggest public celebrations in Britain's recent history. For the first time, television cameras were allowed into Westminster Abbey. The ceremony was broadcast to millions.
The moment of the Queen's crowning is come.
As Elizabeth was crowned, she accepted what, to her, was a sacred duty, an obligation to serve, which was to set her apart for the remainder of her life. Elizabeth was sovereign and head of state, not just of the United Kingdom, but of Britain's realms and territories in every continent.
Sydney-siders turn out to greet their queen.
In late 1953, she set off on the first of many overseas tours, with a 6-month trip to Australia, New Zealand and the Pacific.
I want to tell you all how happy I am to be amongst you and how much I look forward to my journey through Australia.
This is a joyous, spine-tingling welcome.
The young Queen was a star on the world stage, and her popularity was never greater. It's estimated that, in Australia, 3/4 of the country's entire population turned out to see her in person. But as the 1950s gave way to the swinging 60s of the Beatles, attitudes started to change. Old certainties were questioned. The monarchy was seen by some to be stuffy and out of touch. By the late 60s, the palace realised that it needed to take the initiative. The result was a groundbreaking television documentary. The film Royal Family showed the monarchy as it had never been seen before. Elizabeth was shown performing the daily business of the sovereign.
Yes, ma'am. Oh, do you think you could bring up those papers that I was looking at yesterday?
And meeting visiting dignitaries.
The American ambassador, Your Majesty.
Oh, why have you done that?
Save your trouble.
But the film also showed something of the private Elizabeth, relaxing with her family on a picnic at Balmoral.
The salad is ready.
Good.
Her silver jubilee was celebrated with street parties and pageants in 1977.
Good evening, Your Majesty.
You've had a very long day.
By the 1980s, Britain had its first woman Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher. Relations between female head of state and female head of government were sometimes said to have been strained.
With this ring, I thee wed.
For the Queen and her family, the 1980s had begun with a moment of great promise. Prince Charles's wedding in July 1981 to the young Lady Diana Spencer seemed to be a moment of hope for the future. When the marriage began to fail, its decline was a very public one. The couple's separation was announced in 1992. It followed the collapse of the marriages of Princess Anne and Prince Andrew. To compound the misery that year, the Queen had seen part of her favourite home, Windsor Castle, destroyed by fire. She was devastated. The fire seemed to symbolise the reversal of the royal family's fortunes. Little wonder that in a speech the Queen described 1992 as her annus horribilis, her horrible year. But worse was to follow. The death of the by now divorced Diana, Princess of Wales, in a car crash in Paris in August 1997 was to provoke what, for the Queen, was a shocking backlash against the monarchy. She'd remained at Balmoral with Princes William and Harry after Diana died. Her priority had been to care for her grandsons. But to the grieving crowds outside Buckingham Palace and elsewhere, it seemed as though the royal family simply didn't care. The Queen returned to Buckingham Palace and, in an unprecedented live broadcast on the eve of Diana's funeral, she tried to heal the breach that had opened between the palace and the people.
What I say to you now, as your Queen and as a grandmother, I say from my heart.
The Queen promised to learn the lessons from Diana's life and the reaction to her death. The whole episode had shaken her. For the first time, she'd appeared to be out of tune with the feelings of her people.